Hey everyone, how are you? Thank you guys for joining us today for this series of speaker series. I'm DeAnna Hoskins, President CEO of Just Leadership. I was apologizing to my guests for being technical difficulties, but I want to welcome you to this first series of building federal partnerships for collective power. This is the first of its kind. The JCC is the first national policy table created by and for individuals impacted by the criminal justice system. Over the course of the last year, we have been working really hard to build partnerships and relationships. We've built this table where everyone is welcomed, directly impacted individuals, allies, partner organizations. We welcome you and we invite you to have a seat. We are a table where we collectively can leverage our lived experience as the expertise. It is a pleasure to be here today with you as we kick off this series. Today's speaker series features the United States Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration. They will highlight resources and funding dedicated to workforce training and apprenticeship. I am joined today by two incredible individuals, Manny Lamarre, Deputy Assistant Secretary for the ETA, and Alexander Green, Chief of Reentry Employment Opportunities. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. But before we dive into today's session, I want to take a moment to orient everyone who's joining us today to exactly why the JCC is created and why it's truly a one-of-a-kind opportunity. So the JCC was created because the voices of those most impacted were actually missing from conversations. We were missing from policy tables. And I'm not sure if the slides are up because I can't see them. So if you can actually share the slides. So again, this series is around leveraging partnerships to create opportunities for local impact. We're going to move to the next slide to talk about why did we create the JCC? Who are we? The JCC is the first national federal policy table led by and created for individuals who are directly impacted. The JCC forms the connective tissue needed to catalyze full participation in policy practice, understanding, and changes for formerly incarcerated people in our communities. One of the missing elements, next slide, one of the missing elements was why? Our voices were missing from those conversations. Just Leadership was built on a foundation that those closest to the problem or closest to the solution, but typically furthest from resource and power to do anything about it. So when decisions were being made about our communities, decisions were being made about what individuals who have had interaction with the criminal justice system needed, our voices were excluded from those tables. Next. So we know part of the priorities, when you talk about justice impacted individuals, the priorities within our communities have been removal of collateral sanctions, access to housing, employment, health and wellness, access to mental health, access to substance abuse, but also sentencing reform, how individuals are sentenced. That is where our diversion courts are coming in, our drug court. Some cities like New York have created housing court to eliminate the eviction process, change court. We know these are the priorities. So we're going to highlight some of those top priorities. If you go to the next slide, we're having this conversation today because we know employment is one of the federal priorities as well. But within employment opportunities, there are so many more opportunities. There's such dedication to reentry in this population. But some of those, sometimes when it hits our communities, it comes from many different places. It can be disconnected programming that doesn't align. It can be different programs that don't prioritize certain returning citizens. That's where some of your federal funding comes from. And how those funds are distributed in our communities is really sometimes can be inequitable. And what we realize is a lot of times that's because a lot of people who are boots on the ground don't know where the funding is, who's getting the funding, or even how to partner to get the funding. Next slide. So this is always how do I communicate what dedicated reentry funding is at the federal level? So within the federal government, there are two departments that really have dedicated reentry funding. DOL, which we're going to hear from today, and I always like to share this, who's been doing it longer than DOJ. DOL has had RIO, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, but DOJ has Second Chance Act and different funding. And I use this illustration to communicate understanding and only tapping into these two departments. Next slide. It's like going to a water park. Next slide. And missing the enjoyment of the whole park. You only rode on 2 slides, but you missed all these other slides within the federal government of the federal funding landscape. There are so many more opportunities. Next. So I kind of break this down. You see where dedicated reentry funding is. That's DOJ, DOL, but they both have other funding, but that dedicated funding is a small portion. Then you move over into the section that has limited support for reentry population, meaning that they actually serve and actually can focus on individuals in the return reentry process, but it's open. So you got USDA, that's your SNAP and ET benefits and different things. They have funding. DOL, we're going to talk about WIOA today. DOJ has the Brian Jag grant that a lot of people in localities don't know. That's the police department, your state attorney general's office actually partners together to move money into your local communities. HUD, Community Development Block Grant, which the majority of every locality has, that is the funding source that actually supports your shelters, your emergency shelters, your transitional housing and different things of that. But it also could be used around programming as well. And then most people don't even understand HHS, Health and Human Services. But there's this bigger pot of money in the federal government that way more money comes out. We knew about ARPA dollars, a lot of aids to states and localities. That was to stimulate the economy, focused on marginalized communities. DOT, a lot of people don't utilize DOT, but every city, everyone that's on this call, you see an orange barrel, a red barrel on your highway. Those are DOT dollars. Those are opportunities to create targeted hiring opportunities. Roads and bridges, EV charging, surface transit, different things and more. Another department people don't tap into is commerce. That's your national broadband. DOL is actually going to talk about their Good Jobs program. And then we could do targeted hiring around HUD Section 3. So I kind of wanted to give you an overview of just kind of why we've come to this conversation, why we want to communicate opportunities that allows individuals, what I call boots on the ground, doing the work, programs, service providers, to have an understanding of how federal funding comes, but also you're going to hear today how federal funding flows locally into your community through various entities such as your state workforce board and your local workforce organization that you guys can be tapping into as you're working with people who are justice impacted. We're going to go to the next slide. So here, I'm going to kind of turn it over to Manny and Alex to kind of just give us an overview. But again, this is really an informal setting. Manny, I know Alex, people put us in the federal arena on pedestals, but we just people who are actually working on programs, doing a job, but also passionate about it. I will be transparent. Me and Alex had an opportunity to work together when I was in the federal government, but it was really around federal interagency, bringing together federal agencies to really look at how those agencies can improve, how they show up with the resources they have. So I guess I'm gonna start with you, Manny, because I know they told me you're on a time limit. You want to give us a kind of overview of what ETA is, to introduce, share anything you want, but I know from your slides, just tell the audience what is ETA?
Sounds good. Thank you, DeAnna. Appreciate it. And really a pleasure to join you all here again. And it, quite frankly, it just shows just having all the leaders together and the programs all together in a place. It really just shows that it's important at the top. And within ETA, I'll kind of do 3 really quick things. The first, just quick high-level overview of ETA. Second, I'll go into our ETA priorities and how this connects with this audience, particularly specifically justice involved. Three, I'll start to share a bit on the overview of the workforce system, and then I'll really turn to Alex to dive deeper into some specific grants. And Alex and his team are just doing tremendous work. So taking a step back, just really quickly, when you think about ETA, well, within the Department of Labor, it's really, and one of my colleagues says this, it's really kind of a three-legged stool of federal, state, and local partners. So when you think about ETA, it's a combination of both programs, policies, and investments. On the policy side, we have a range of policies within ETA that supports workforce development, high quality job training, labor market information, income support, as well as kind of broader strategic alignment, whether we're talking about investments as well. So if you go to the next slide, this is when I had a lot more hair and I didn't have any bald spots. So we'll just stick up to this slide right now. What I want to talk a little bit about, and I think we could probably go to the next slide as well, is really pause for a moment to talk about the ETA priorities. So I mentioned big picture ETA, really a combination of programs that supports both program policy and investments, and that supports job training, labor market information, income support. But I think what's more important and what's most relevant for this audience is that in the past several years under the Biden-Harris administration, we've really refocused and really identified 4 core priorities and what we're calling ETA 2030 vision. And that ETA 2030 vision consists of 4 areas, and all 4 areas I know for this audience will connect and resonate very strongly with. The first one is around opening up opportunities for vulnerable populations. So when we're talking about opening up opportunities for vulnerable populations, this specifically is talking about how we think about supporting and making sure people with justice involvement get a seat at the table, quite frankly. And our acting secretary often talk about unleashing your full power. And really to do that, you have to have the individuals that's most impacted having a seat at the table. So your dedication and the organizations in terms of the stakeholders here, it really aligns with our goals to ensure that workers have a say in the work, realize their goals, and really make that like meaningful contribution. So again, the first one is opening up opportunities for underserved workers and communities. The second one is around new industry partnerships that leads to good jobs. For this, what are we talking about? So we're talking about really at the core of the work that we do, we want to ensure individuals have those opportunities to access those good jobs. Individuals justice involved have that opportunity to access those good jobs. So it's about how do we partner with employers, community-based organizations, labor, and really across the board agencies to think strategically to create these pathways. And we do this in a number of ways. You'll hear Alex talk about some specific investments, whether we're talking about the growth opportunities or the pathways home. But also I'll just talk about registered apprenticeships, how that can be an avenue to really create pathways. We're scaling apprenticeships across industry sectors and creating opportunities for individuals without the background or skill set, or even if they have a foundational background or skill set, to plug in and have a meaningful access to high quality job training and careers, quite frankly. So that's the second one. The third one, it may not seem intuitive, but I think to probably most outside of this audience, but I think everyone here will be able to resonate with this. The third priority is really around building a better care economy. So for this, when we're talking about a care economy, we're really thinking about how do we create steps to create a viable pathway to affordable, high quality care, as well as ensure, for example, caregivers really have the broad spectrum of care and professions that supports the need so that individuals could thrive. So another component of that is thinking about supportive services, mental health. We know that without those core components, whether we're talking about supportive service needs or mental health, long-term care, and other forms of care, you can't really thrive in your career. So we want to make sure that we're intentional about creating space for supportive services in the broader care economy to ensure that individuals are supported. The fourth element here is really about taking action today for the future of work. What do we mean by that? Well, quite frankly, because you serve people in the justice involved, the department really recognizes your work is really critical, and it's quite frankly a first steps in connecting workers with the resources they need to find success in a rapidly changing economy. We also, quite frankly, the Department of Labor, we're really prioritizing job quality across all of our work. So whether it's the focusing on the care economy, where we're talking about healthcare and childcare, or we're talking about the dedication and developing infrastructure jobs, whether we're talking about investment through the bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, all of the broader kind of infrastructure needs, we want to think strategically so that individuals just as involved and have a seat at the table and have access to those good jobs being created, because we know that good jobs they really are the foundation of an equitable economy that really lifts workers, families, and quite frankly, just make businesses more competitive. We think if we improve by improving the quality of job opportunities and increasing economic self-sufficiency, it calls for really job seekers to really be able to secure good jobs with family-sustaining wages and really advance opportunities. So those are our four core priorities. And quite frankly, again, they intersect at every step of the way in the work that you do. And you will see that reflected in our priorities, whether we're talking about policies or in the investments in our program side that Alex will talk about. Now, I'll jump to the next slide just really quickly to kind of provide a brief overview of the workforce system. So I really like, DeAnna, your slide about all the rides in the amusement park. Outside of making me reminisce about those days of when I used to go to the amusement park and have those rides and trying to navigate through. I think when you think about the workforce system, we really think about it like we want to make sure that you see the big picture. So that second slide, so you can know and see how to navigate and plug into it. So on the big picture is that this graphic, it really illustrates the roles in administering workforce programs and also how funding flows through the Department of Labor, through the workforce system to the local level. Remember, I mentioned it's a three-legged stool. You have the federal, you have the state, and you have the local. So the workforce system is really a decentralized system that states run workforce development programs through their state workforce agencies, along with a workforce development board at the state level. And they really set the vision and the priorities for the state through the state workforce board. It flows to the governor, and so the governor appoint members on the board, and you also have members from the business and industry, as well as the public, and labor actually sits on those board. So in my former role, I actually sat on the state workforce board as a governor's designee and overseeing the strategy and vision for big picture for the board. The reason why that's important for you all is being engaged at that level, you can start helping to shape not just the conversation, but actually the vision of your state. Now, when you go to the next level, you have the local workforce development boards. Actually, you can stay in the previous slide. When the local workforce development boards, funds flow from the federal vis-a-vis the governor to the state, and now you have the local workforce development boards that oversee and funds for their local area, and they set the local strategy, policies, and training priorities. So again, it mirrors what the state is doing. And really the local boards, they ensure decision-making and services are really designed to meet the needs of the community. Again, how can you get connected or be aware? There's also seats to serve on the local board. So when in my previous role, we had a representative from reentry sit on the local workforce development board, and they helped inform the conversation, the language, our investments in the local communities. You also have American Job Centers, and they serve job seekers and businesses directly. So the state and local boards, they don't serve individuals directly. It's through the American Job Centers, and they're obviously there are service providers that really actually provide those direct services to individuals. So that is really the big picture of the workforce system when you think about the workforce system. And now, I'll just.
Manny, I want to interrupt you here because I want to make sure it makes sense, right? Because I get this. This was one of the reasons that we decided we need to have this series, because we realized people didn't understand how this is independent, but how the money flows, right? And where are opportunities for individuals on a local level to intersect their voice, to get a seat at the table, right? So we're sitting here with the JCC, with DOL nationally, but I think it's important to say, once those dollars hit your state agency workforce board, they have meetings. They have meetings to talk about whether their new allocation is going to prioritize. And it was at those state workforce board meetings as director of reentry where I would go and say, this population has to be included in the strategy. This population of individuals, 18 to 25-year-olds, always were included. but other individuals who were directly impacted by the criminal justice were not specifically identified. And then when it came, once we were able to get it into the state strategic plan, and as Manny said, it rolled to the local workforce board, that's where my relationship was built. The local workforce board of Southwest Ohio had an executive director. Me and her became best friends. And actually, we helped. How do you implement this within the city of Cincinnati or within Southwest Ohio? That actually played out at our local workforce departments. That's where you send individuals who are actually seeking employment, seeking opportunities for training. Those are those departments. But service providers, so many of you are on this call are service providers who can access those funds as well. But I wanted to make sure you understood you all can have a seat at the table. Everyone can have a seat at the table. Your voice matters. As Manny said, state agency, if your state agency does not have a directly impacted person sitting on a state workforce board, build relationships with your criminal justice office that reports to the governor, with your workforce board. Show up at those meetings because it is open to the public. It's your state. It's federal dollars, your local workforce board. So I wanted to make sure you guys understood there are points. Once it leaves the federal government, we're advocating now, we're partnering now on a federal highest level, but we got to keep going to ensure that those dollars are actually where the rubber hits the road. I'm sorry, man.
I think that was actually I think that was a perfect, and it's a perfect segue to turn into Alex, but you just, reminded me and sparked something like, and there's a concrete example of this, which is just that, DeAnna, like your point is like, not just is well taken, but really is super, super important. I recall because we had a Justice Involved organization that was, that sat on our local boards. I sat on the state workforce board, and we built a relationship, and they continue to engage about the priorities of when we say underserved communities and populations, what does that mean for reentry? We eventually, and at the state level, I had leveraged governor's reserve funds for grants that actually specifically for reentry individuals, as an opportunity. And those organizations on the ground were doing some really great work to support individuals from the that's justice involved individuals. And that came because exactly what you said, DeAnna. And ironically, those meetings are open to the public, and there would be like one person and maybe, one person that just ended up like popping up to the wrong room. But when folks really were engaged, they literally had an opportunity to make a direct impact. And that investment that we flowed out was a result of those individuals being at the table and engaging and calling that out. So that's a concrete example of what you've said, DeAnna, and I've seen that play in action even in my own experience. But I don't want to.
I think there's a missing opportunity of where our voices can be impactful. So thank you for sharing that, because you may show up, like you said, at the local workforce board or the state board, but because who else sits at that table, you may not even understand other funding opportunities that come out of single state authorities and different things of that nature.
Exactly.
So if we are not present at those tables in those rooms, we don't have access to it. So that's exactly what
it's open, and it's open to the public. So with that, I don't want to take too much time. I just want to quickly turn it over, Alex Green, within the REO, the reentry team, and his entire team. Quite frankly, at least at the federal level, they do the tremendous and the hard work. And so if anything, they just make me look good, but they're actually the one doing the day-to-day hard work. So Alex, I appreciate you, and he'll share more around the work of the reentry employment opportunities team that spearheaded, as well as some tips and resources in applying for ETA grants and other reentry related resources at large. So you're in better hands with Alex and the team. So I'll turn it over to you.
Manny, we so appreciate you.
Thanks, Manny.
This is just the beginning if you have to drop off, but thank you.
Sounds good. I'll stay on for a bit more.
All right.
Yeah, so the Reentry Employment Opportunities Unit, also known as REO, we provide funding authorized as research and evaluation under Section 169 of WIOA of 2014. And our funds serve justice-involved youth, young adults, and adults who were formerly incarcerated. We improve workforce outcomes for justice-involved youth, youth being considered between 15 and 18, and young adults, that age group is usually between 18 and 24. And lastly, we improve the workforce outcome for adults. And based on the specific initiative, The adult population can be categorized as either 18 and above or 25 and over. And our grantees include states, local governments, nonprofits, American Indian and tribal organizations, workforce boards, and others, depending on what is outlined in the funding opportunity announcement. But we also aim to inform the workforce system on how to best serve this population. So our pilot and demonstration projects test the successful models and practices found in community, faith-based, and government environments that have not yet been, fully tested in the public workforce system or can be improved upon. Next slide. Go back one slide. Oh, looks like we're missing the growth opportunities. Well, we'll go to Pathway Home. You go to the next slide. Yeah. So Pathway Home, or PH, this is actually the 5th iteration of the Pathway Home grant program. And like the previous 4 cohorts, the PH5 grant designs are kind of built on the findings of the linking employment activities pre-release implementation study. And the PH model provides reentry services to begin while participants are still incarcerated, and for those services to continue post-release. And these projects are designed to eliminate the time gap between release from prison and enrollment into a workforce development reentry program, leading to skills-based employment. PH5 is also obviously employment-focused, and therefore, scoring criteria, you had awarded, bonus points to the applicants, partnering with employers and/or industry organizations and/or unions that commit to, providing work experience, on-site job-related training, mentoring, and training to participants in the skills employers need in particular. And partners, must also work towards increasing employment opportunities for participants post-release with an aim to towards boosting labor supply in critical industry sectors facing, increased demand, workforce gaps, and supply chain challenges. The next slide.
You know what, Alex, I want to stay here because
Okay.
Can we go back really quick? Because I think this is gonna go back one to the one he just, yeah. So when I did the intro, I talked about that dedicated funding being a small portion, right? While for DOL, this is a huge amount, 224 million. And when we initially look at this, and Alex knows who DeAnna is, I push back on everything. But no, I needed it to make sense for me, right? So 27,000 individuals are served, and this is just to the audience of the investment in reentry in justice impacted individuals, why it is necessary to have the information so we can expand our access, we can expand our opportunities. In 4 years, $224 served 27,000 individuals. 600,000 people leave prison every year. If I multiply 600,000 by 4, I come to 2.4 million individuals walking out of prison in a 4-year period, and 27,000 were served. That's less than 1.1% of the people who need the resources getting it, right? If I divide the 224 million by that 600,000, not even the amount of individuals comes out to less than $300 per person. So the reason we're starting this speaker series is to give you the information to expand. DOL is one, and they have dedicated, and they're doing a great job to show us how to partner on dedicated resources, but you also see the needle in the haystack for the issue and the population we're dealing with. I just wanted it to make mathematical sense to why we're bringing these conversations forward and how the disjointed and how we can put it together if we have the information. So I'm sorry, Alex, but I just wanted, I thought about that earlier.
That's a great point. So for the next slide, we can go to the next one. Actually, it looks like some of the slides are out of order. Yeah. So in 2022, ETA and the Bureau of Prisons, partnered to create and launch what's known as Partners for Reentry Opportunities and Workforce Development, also known as PROUD. And historically, DOL has worked with state and local prisons and jails on reentry programs, like the Pathway Home, which I previously talked about. But their PROUD initiative here was our first opportunity to work with federal correctional institutions and build off what we learned from our state and local grants. So this initiative is designed to improve the employment and reentry outcomes of participants by aligning the job training and skills development happening in federal prisons to the specific labor market needs of the communities where reentering citizens will live. But in addition to improving outcomes of participants, PROUD programs also strengthen the communities and labor force where the programs are located. Strengthening the labor force obviously makes communities safer because job training programs and employment lead to higher earnings and lower arrest rates. And PROUD is kind of a multi-stage program in which services follow the participant as they transition from one reentry stage to the next. So First Step Act funds are used during incarceration in federal prisons and time participants spend in residential reentry centers and halfway houses, etc. And then the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funds pick up when individuals are no longer under the care or custody of BOP, Bureau of Prisons. So this allows states to support people throughout their transition to the community.
Alex, you said something really important that I don't think a lot of people even knew, and because I didn't know when I got to the federal government, is that all of the reentry funding that had been previously dedicated coming out of the federal government could not be utilized with those serving federal time because it was a cross-pollination of federal offices, right? So this opportunity of PROUD allowed that to actually happen for the first time. And it was amazing to me that people could serve federal time, return to their local community, and because your program is working off of federal dollars, that person really may not have opportunity to utilize those programs and different things. So I think that was a catch for me that I totally didn't get until I was in the midst of managing Second Chance Act and realized people in BOP could not use access to those program dollars. And in some areas, the specific part was because Washington, D.C. does not have statehood. D.C. residents serve time in federal BOP, but because they were in federal BOP, were lacking access to the programs that will support them when they came home. It was just, when I say the way we were operating was disjointed, it goes back to my first slide of how programs just were missing each other, which technically means they were missing people. So I'll go ahead. I just wanted to clarify that.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. So that's why, we've tried to do different things here and there to fill in some of these gaps and make some of these complex situations less complex. So thanks for that, DeAnna. We can move to the next slide. So these figures represent the WIOA, primary performance outcomes over the past year of service delivery for RIO grantees. So over 8,000 individuals were served in the adult programs, while about 5,000 were served in the youth and young adult programs. For example, Pathway Home is an adult program, whereas Growth Opportunities only serves youth and young adults. So RIO participants tend to earn credentials at a high rate, and the recidivism rate is quite low relative, to their peers that are not enrolled in the RIO programs. While the employment outcomes are respectable, the department obviously aims to improve both the employment rate and the earnings of those who complete our programs. We go to the next slide.
Alex, can I ask you a question on that I
Sure.
think it was something that previously I was engaged with DOL, was apprenticeship programs, right? I think we miss within our states opportunities of people serving state time. And we know prisons are ran by the people who serve time, right? So the kitchen, culinary, you have laundry, you have medical, you have every operation, library, all of those things, education ran by the people who serve time. And we had started looking at the opportunity to create credentialed apprenticeship within the prison complex, right? So that people could walk out with the credentials. I'm wondering if that apprenticeship component or those conversations have started again, and is there room to have those? And you don't have to answer it publicly, and people are like, but he said, I know I ain't gonna set you up like that. But I think, those are opportunities that as we work with correctional leaders, because people are no longer adversaries, we are allies, we have to work together. And if we want to improve people returning to our communities with skills, knowledge, and abilities to get them actually moving in the economy, these are other ways we can actually be innovative and creative to say, are there opportunities to utilize or leverage state workforce dollars to create state work apprenticeship programs within Department of Corrections?
Yeah, that's a great point. And with our Pathway Home initiative that I mentioned earlier, that was a lot of the thought behind it. And because, some of the state and local correctional facilities, depending on the warden, depending on the governor of those states, they could have some flexibility. So some of them have, full apprenticeship kind of trainings, behind the bars. I know like the state of Iowa, they have a system set up where it's the ideal situation out in Iowa. But as you go from state to state, there's different entities, different personalities of those states and individuals in charge. But that's something we strongly encourage, and we put into our Pathway Home grant. So when folks start getting services and organizations start working with folks pre-release, that's the main part of it, enrolling folks and getting training while they're still behind the fence, so that they can come out, hitting the ground running, already having the skills, and then working on some of the other supportive services once they're out. But yeah, so that's definitely the ideal way to go about it, and we're continuing to find ways to get it more as a national kind of model, so that but that's one of those tough things dealing with different states and some of the correctional facilities in those states. But so I'm so glad you brought that up.
And I have a real life scenario that I want to share, because when a state does that, the opportunity that the individual has. So there was a guy in the state of Ohio, because they did do this around HVAC, creating credentials. While he was serving a 7-year sentence, he actually was trained on the boiler system, HVAC, within that prison system. He got to know that system. Upon his release, because it was a special system, prisons are old, you got to know the system. The guy who trained him let him know, I'm retiring. And there aren't many people in the state of Ohio who have this experience, and there's no one who knows this system. You were one of the people who took it. And I'm proud to say that I think Chris has been out 8 or 9 years, but Chris went back as a trainee, as a state of Ohio employee at the same prison he served time as the HVAC. I am happy to say Chris is now the supervisor of that HVAC department within that same prison where he served those 7 years. So the opportunities are there. Again, it goes back to that scale that Manny showed. You got to be at that state workforce board to actually push opportunities, to push strategies at your local of how those dollars coming in. And your state can always find creative ways, like Alex said, to leverage and enhance those programs. Again, when we talk about reentry, actually starts at engagement. When we interact, Chris is a pure example of that, of when he hit the correctional system, people grabbed him, what is your training? What are you going to get invested in? How are you going to move through? And he actually moved through, and we're looking at the success. He's a homeowner and all those things, but it's because of the opportunity he was granted while he was actually serving time. So I just wanted to share that with the public.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's exactly what we aim to model with our program designs, especially with Pathway Home and our adult programs. So with this slide, the work opportunity tax credit, I'm sure most folks know something about it, but I'll just talk about how it obviously improves the chances of individuals in the targeted group to get hired. It's a one-time credit for each new hire, providing a credit of up to, I believe now it's $9,600, and employers can meet their business needs, by hiring individuals, which includes but are not limited to the justice involved, but also veterans, summer youth, and a couple of other target groups. In regards to the federal bonding program, bonds are effective, starting on day one of employment. An employer can extend the bond, for an additional, 6 months. And actually, an individual can be bonded for up to a year. And the top industries utilizing bonds in 2023 are manufacturing, nonprofits, grocery stores, healthcare, restaurant and food services, construction, government, and transportation. And the federal bonding program has over a 99% success rate with less than a 1% claim rate since 1996. I mean, 1966.
Right.
1966.
This is really a good point on two folds that I want to share with everyone chiming in, especially those organizations, small nonprofits, those organizations that formerly incarcerated are actually creating themselves. The work opportunity tax credit is great because typically formerly incarcerated, when we build businesses, when we build organizations, we hire formerly incarcerated, right? So this is actually an opportunity that while we're nonprofits, if you have a for-profit entity that supports your nonprofit, if you started a cleaning service, if you started any type of service in any way, this actually can benefit you to take advantage to actually be able to support your business. But also, Alex, like you said, federal bonding has been around since 1966, and it's always been underutilized, right? It was always, how do we get the message out? And then the question came, are we entrenching the stigma associated with individuals returning to the community, right? Because if I've truly served my time, I haven't, did anything to violate to go back, when do I stop needing a carrot? When do I stop needing, I look at myself, 25 years coming up on Monday that I've been totally removed, homeowner, all of this, when does our perpetual punishment end? And are we always going to need a bond? Are we always going to need a tax opportunity to make other people feel good about hiring us when research, right? Everybody wants research. When research states people who have served a significant amount of time are less likely to even recidivate, while we talk about the recidivism rate is 35%, I always say it's the message. That means 65% of us didn't go back. Nobody wants to talk to the 65. We just want to focus on the harm of the 35. But in reality, even if you look at that 35, what was the return? Typically, it's not a new crime. It's a violation of probation or parole of a quality of life. But I guess my question is, it's underutilized could be a good thing that employers are saying, I don't need it. I don't need it to protect people. But is it almost a safety net of when do we ever not going to need something like a federal bond? I think people should use it if it's a tool to get you in the door, but I don't think what we've seen is that once it expires, if employers want to get rid of you, whatever, they find creative ways. So I guess, do you ever see us moving away from needing these extra little instrument and tools to get people with a criminal record access to basic human needs of being able to have a living wage?
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, the goal, to be honest, the goal is for me to be out of a job at some point, because all of the resources and all the programs, there's to be the best possible program that can be found is being instituted across the country, and so then the Rio unit won't be needed anymore. That's the goal. So I hope that's what we work toward. That's what we're hoping. And I guess one thing about the bonds is that, for employers that know about it, they use it if they want to. But yeah, like you said, though, some employers and some folks, it's unnecessary. It's just a little, like you mentioned, a little carrot. If that's the difference between maybe one person and another person, maybe it may come down to something like that. But yeah, I mean, hopefully there'll be a day where none of it's needed anymore. That's definitely the goal. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so specific to the Employment and Training Administration, here you'll find tips, standard terms and conditions, and recruitment of grant applicant panelists at the ETA website for grants. So this site can be kind of useful if you're seeking information for upcoming funding opportunity announcements. And this is also a great place to find competitive grant application tips and standard procedures for grant making. The ETA Grants Office provides grants management to all ETA offices over the grant lifecycle. And the Office of Grants Management delivers grant administration and policy information throughout the full life of a grant pre-award to closeout of the federal assistance award. Next slide.
Alex, can I
Yep.
just, again, I want to highlight something for individuals who are listening that, you know, for me, my experience was I was totally intimidated by federal grants. In DOL, it was a process of how you complete a federal grant. But what I learned was the easiest way to understand what a federal grant calls for, how federal grants are written, what the process is to sign up to become a reviewer. Sign up to become a reviewer of grant applications, and you'll understand how they're scored, what they're looking for, how you answer questions based on the information in a grant application. And you could do this with DOL, DOJ has it for Second Chance, various departments. But this is one of the aspects that I had to understand to gain the knowledge and ability to sit and compete with larger organizations when I was a small grassroots, right? I had to understand what is it they're putting in the application? What does it take around capacity to handle and manage? But I also was able to get humble and say, oh, I'm a small shop. I don't have the capacity to manage as the full grantee, but I do have the capacity to sub-grant with the grantee to provide a unique opportunity and service. So you really get to learn, and I don't want you guys to shortchange yourself and say, hey, we put in this grant application. Do you understand what's on the inside? And part of understanding is having a seat at the table on the inside so you can go back out and work that process to actually build your programs. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too, because there's when folks within the ETA website, I believe it's on here, but yeah, when you can apply to be a panelist, where you could like DeAnna said, where you can look at different applications coming in, and the wealth of knowledge you learn from, you know, reviewing those applications and, you know, working with other panel members when doing scoring criteria and that kind of stuff. Yeah, you really see the ins and outs of what a lot of programs are doing. I'm also glad you mentioned, DeAnna, about the sub-grantee thing, because one of the things within our legislation, at least for program year 2023, is we always have to set aside 30 million of our RIO funding per year go toward intermediaries serving youth and young adults, which, and by intermediaries, that's, you know, organizations serving at least 3 communities across 2 states. So to DeAnna's point, those other communities in those other states, those would be sub-grantees. Mm-hmm. So that's how also some organizations that are kind of not at full scale yet to become a primary grantee, but they can become a sub-grantee and kind of get in the door, learn some of the characteristics of what are needed to be a primary grantee, and then can become, you know, a primary grantee one day. So thanks for bringing that up, DeAnna.
And also not being afraid to throw your hat in the ring. Greg Kiesling is on here from Indiana Recycle Force. We work together, but I did exactly what Greg said. I threw my hat in the ring and applied for a grant, knowing I didn't have the capacity to execute the grant and it wouldn't be awarded, but I did it to get feedback on my grant application. So I was able to then sit my team down and say, this is what the panel reviewers say was missing that we didn't include. We weren't detailed here. We didn't talk. And actually, you know, I was really surprised when we got our application back for the feedback. We've been sub-grantees, but we wanted feedback to say, are we ready to step into this arena as a prime grantee? And the feedback we got, it was really not about, it was just being more clear. so that your reviewers, and I'll say this, typically panelists aren't always experts in your field. Panelists may have interest in the field, but they could be academia, they could be other things. And when you're talking from a grassroots perspective, boots on the ground, you have to be crystal clear that that person, who the audience you're talking to, understands your program. You can't write a grant proposal on a perspective that you know what you're trying to say. You got to write it on, you're trying to sell this to someone who's going to be reading that. So I thought that was really important too. Thanks, Greg.
So for this slide, yeah, we recognize that applying and managing a federal award, to DeAnna's point, can sometimes be an overwhelming responsibility. So to kind of ensure that you have the tools and resources and information at your fingertips, we've kind of created what's called Workforce GPS, which is the grants application and management community, which is pretty much your one-stop source for smart training and resources to establish effective management of a federal award from DOL. I think since 2015, the Office of Grants Management has trained over 9,000 individuals and hosted 3 cohorts of smart trainings, which are strategies for sound grants management, comprised of monitoring, accountability, risk mitigation, and transparency. And so additional features include grant application 101, action plans, policies and procedures, and a resource index, and much more. And so in this slide, we kind of provide you the link to this web-based toolkit for prospective applicants. And we'll go to the next slide. So the reentry community of practice, this site offers practitioners new ideas and tools to do the invaluable work of, changing lives and renewing futures of the justice involved. You'll find information on improving program practices, supporting transitions, strengthening partnerships, ensuring sustainability for your programs, and a couple other things. As far as the Career One Stop, it's pretty much a source of for employment information, a place to manage your career. It provides career tools to help job seekers, students, businesses, and career professionals. And it's also sponsored by the Department of Labor. The ONET is an application that was created for the general public to provide broad access to the ONET database of occupational information. ONET Online offers a wide variety of search options and occupational data. It includes information on skills, knowledges, abilities, work activities, and interests associated with over 900 occupations. Excuse me. And businesses and human resources professionals and job seekers often use ONET. And job seekers, in regards to using ONET, they can find out which jobs fit with their interests and skills and experience. They can explore growth career profiles using the latest available labor market data. They can research what it takes to get their dream job. They can maximize earning potential and job satisfaction, and know what it takes to be successful in their field and in related occupations. And then lastly, for this slide, My Next Move, it's an interactive tool for job seekers and students to learn more about their career options. So this resource has tasks, skills, salary information, and more for over 900 different careers. And users can kind of find careers through keyword search by browsing industries that employ different types of workers. And My Next Move is also developed and maintained by the National Center for ONET Development under the sponsorship of ETA, pretty much through a grant to the North Carolina Department of Commerce. And last slide. All right, so 10. So Training Employment Notice 1821 is meant to provide local workforce boards, American Job Centers, and workforce development partners and grantees with information on supporting community violence intervention strategies. This includes programs such as our Rio program, which is an excellent example of the ways in which workforce strategies mutually reinforce approaches that underpin CVI programs. DOL, we provide grants that connect, support, and train individuals while serving workers in all communities with targeted programs for teens and young adults, low-wage workers, women in non-traditional occupations, people with disabilities, veterans and returning service members, obviously previously incarcerated youth and adults, tribal communities, and rural communities.
You know, this is a really good leverage point as well. When you talk about CVI strategies, it's become a priority with the administration. So there's funding opportunities, but also again, within your states, you're a state attorney general. And I know I'm so Ohio, right? But realizing some things that we were able to do, even in Ohio, we were able to partner with our local police department around violence reduction strategies. And that's actually how I was able to build the Office of Reentry. Because what I realized was individuals who were caught up in the lifestyle with a high propensity to commit a homicide or be a homicide victim had the same needs of a person returning from corrections communities as well. And a lot of them had already had interaction. So we were able to leverage those dollars actually and build the Office of Reentry to show a need in Hamilton County, which then ultimately turned to the county commissioners, making the Office of Reentry a line item in the county budget for sustainability, right? So sometimes you have to be creative and not look at, oh, it says CVI, that's strictly for violence, but those are around support services. And that same population that is targeted around the CVI strategies is typically the same population that is returning or have had interaction with the criminal justice, especially the 18 to 21-year-olds. So I thought that was really a great opportunity for people to look within their police department, within other initiatives that are focused on CVI strategies and how they can leverage it for the populations that they're working with locally. Alex, is there another slide, or is this kind of where I just do a DeAnna?
Yeah, this is but before, this is the last slide, but I did want to mention that we currently right now we have 2 funding opportunity announcements that are on the street for the public to apply to organizations. We have a growth opportunities funding opportunity announcement available. I believe that's open until April 2nd. Folks can go to grants.gov. And I guess you can keyword or type in growth opportunities if you want to apply to that funding opportunity announcement. And then we also have a Pathway Home funding opportunity announcement that's currently open. I believe that's going to close on April 4th, I believe. So if you go to grants.gov and look for current or open funding announcements and type those in, you can find those opportunities to be able to potentially apply to. And with that, that concludes my presentation.
All right, Alex, I know we had allotted an hour for this. Do you have time so that we possibly can take, after I do this next slide, a couple of questions from that my team is sorting? So if we go to the next slide, I want to share, you know, this is, I operate off of metaphors, guys. And so when we're talking about funding opportunities, I break things out into games. Chess, which is strategic, long-term, I categorize as legislation. You can introduce legislation in one session, it doesn't pass, you got to reintroduce it again, you're pushing it, you're fighting. It's the long game. It's a long strategic game. But then we have checkers. That's on the ground, your grassroots, moving the needle, working, providing services, and those are, it's funding there. It's funding you can grab, it's funding you can tap into that most of us don't know about. But as the JCC, nobody plays backgammon, right? That's the gray area. That's the area where you're working with individuals like Alex and Manny, who are career employees, who no matter what an election brings are going to be there. We still get to build those partnerships to continue to move the issue. It's not the pretty. The media is not going to come highlight us of they're working in the gray area, they're working in the backgammon. But what I understand about the gray area, it doesn't take legislation to actually impact and have your voice heard so that when you play checkers, it's the rubber hitting the road, right? So it's actually where you actually can sit down and say, why is this working this way? And what can we change to have a greater impact? And then those dollars are flowing to your community and checkers. We never had to play the legislation game. It's really actually having our voices at the table, having those partnerships that were actually impacting change. So typically I call this slide in certain presentations, do you even know what game you're playing? And if you know what game you're playing, do you really understand the rules of that game? So this is something that you'll see over and over on the speaker series as we move forward. Where do you align, but how do you understand how chess is played and how chess impacts your checker game on the ground? Because the ultimate goal is, next slide, everything we're doing is where the rubber hits the road. Everything we're doing is moving to the next slide. Which is all centered back to the people on the ground. We want to impact our communities, to impact our economy, to impact and increase, because no matter what people say, if this is an issue of public safety, I challenge everyone, I challenge every decision maker, who are you saying has a right to feel safe? Because making a livable wage, being able to live in safe, affordable housing is feeling safe. So public safety is not to protect certain people against other people. Public safety is to protect all individuals and ensure all individuals have ability to feel safe. That is the end of this session, but I do want to open it up for some questions. If Alex said he could stick around, my team is kind of sorting through some questions for me. Stephen, do you want to throw out a couple of questions or do you want me to read them?
There's a few highlighted in the chat, DeAnna, if you scroll back up.
Okay, I'll go to the chat. And will these dollars be around for the next 10 years?
Question. That all pretty much depends on Congress and appropriations. Each year, bills get passed, funding bills get passed or not passed, and CR, continuing resolution, those kind of things. So that, in order for us to operate, budgets got to get passed, and that's way before. That's way in the weeds of in the Capitol before it even touches us. So as long as appropriations there, then we can then we'll get some dollars to be able to do reentry work. But 10 years, it might be double the amount now.
Right.
If we're able to do enough of our job, and making things better, maybe it'll be less. So it's tough to say.
This is a good question that segues into information. So WIOA, which is Workforce Innovation Opportunity, what is it?
Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Yep.
It's actually up for reauthorization, right? So I think the public understanding what reauthorization means that that bill has come up to be reauthorized, and certain things happen during reauthorization. The money can be increased, the money can be decreased, but it's also an opportunity to insert your voice. So it brings me to March 28th, where the JCC is hosting another webinar where we talk about and understanding how to redline, how to get your voice included in legislation. And guess what? We're using WIOA as the example, right? Because JCC has an opportunity. We're working with committee members on Congressional Hill that oversee that committee to push this bill. And they're saying, hey, look at this bill. What is it missing? What does it need? So that we can move it through our committee to ensure that people directly impacted are having a great impact. So I challenge my team to hold a session to show the community how you redline. And this is what I call power building. You want a legislator to share legislative language with you to say, this is what we're getting ready to introduce. Did we miss the mark? Did we hit the mark? Or is there something that should be inclusive? And if you know me, I throw in the whole mansion, and if they redline it, tag it out, and I end up with a 2-bedroom apartment, well, I was homeless when the bill started, right? So to have a 2-bedroom, I made progress. So on March 28th, registration link will be coming. We will be back here as the JCC actually talking about how to redline. This is where you get your voice in. You know, I'll share with the public what I'm trying to get in WIOA. WIOA is for underserved or unemployed individuals in the workforce to get access to training and all of that. But when we talked about it hitting the state levels of the strategy, a lot of times formerly incarcerated are missing. So of course, I'm trying to push the envelope at the federal level to say, can you just add formerly incarcerated to the legislative language so that when it hits the state, they can't X us out because it's in legislation. I might get it, I might not, but guess what? I put it in the redlining. They'll take it out if they don't like it. They might like it. We don't know, but I want you guys to join us so you start to understand, because this is just one of the bills for reauthorization. And we also get bills that are going to be introduced to redline to give our voice in. And that's what the JCC is. So staying active, keeping your emails open, that if we say, hey, here's the legislation that's going to be introduced, what do you think? Go in and add your comments so we can sort through those comments and we can give it back to Congress. We can give it back to committees that are actually looking at submitting that type of information if our voice is at. And that's the importance of having a seat at the table. Another question, you know, one of the biggest things is around funding, Alex, is the exclusion of certain populations, right? And a lot of times, the most excluded population is individuals convicted of sex offenses. Are they carved out of utilizing those dollars, or what individuals can your funding in Rio in any way say everyone but?
Well, that's a great question, because as part of the Second Chance Act, which we decoupled from in 2019-ish here at DOL, that enabled us to then be able to, in our grant funding opportunity announcements, allow grantees to serve folks with sex offenses or violent offenses. Whereas when we were coupled with the Second Chance Act, we weren't able to. Second Chance Act 2007. So under those First Step Act funds, that we kind of decoupled from that. So our grant funds can serve those populations now. But yeah, and previously, I think 2019 and earlier, we were not allowed to.
Yeah, I remember that being an issue, and we were fighting for it, and especially because of how sex offenses are actually labeled in different states, and different things. But here's two more questions really quick, Alex. Does an organization need to be a 501c3 in order to tap into DOL funding?
Not all of them, no, not particularly. I mean, sometimes it may depend on the particular funding opportunity announcement, the eligible applicant criteria, but not usually. There could be 501c3 organizations with nonprofit status. There could be for-profit organizations. We've had that before. So no, it doesn't have to be. There's local. Yeah, even some employers have applied. Some correctional facilities have applied. Yeah, so they don't have to necessarily be 501c3.
The next question, how do you find out? Do you guys list the individuals who've been awarded the grants in any way so that people can go see who in their locality has been awarded that they possibly can partner with?
Yeah, so I think there's 3 places. Let me see. I know the Office of Grants, man, there's a map. I can find out where the map is, but when organizations get awarded the grants, there's a press release that comes out that ends up being on the DOL website that shows the organizations that were funded, lists the name and the funding amount and their location. So whenever, so like I'd say the 2 open funding opportunity announcements that we have now that are going to close in April, I'd say approximately somewhere in June, maybe they'll get awarded, and pending if we have appropriations, and yeah, the names of the organization will be listed on the DOL website in a press release. So I guess if around that time, if someone, I guess, went to the DO website and searched growth opportunities or pathway home, what'll probably come up is the press release, and they'll have those organizations and how much they were funded for. But something else we also put up, it won't be when the announcements are made. It'll be maybe 2 or 3 weeks later. We put up a synopsis of each of the grants that were awarded. We put up a synopsis of their statement of work. So we pretty much do a condensed thing. Everybody on my team, we go through all the statement of works and pretty much put the meat and potatoes on the one page for each organization. Let's say how many folks they plan to enroll, what kind of training they plan on doing in their program model, maybe certain performance measures. Yeah, but pretty much a one-page synopsis of each awardee. We put up about 3 weeks after the award, and we put that also in the Rio DOL Rio website as well, so organizations can kind of see. Oh, it also within that one-page summary on each grant, it shows what locations those organizations are going to be serving. Because as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have intermediaries sometimes. So if you just look at the announcement, you may see, okay, this organization that's located in Kansas City, Missouri, they got awarded, but that organization that's located in Kansas City, Missouri might be an intermediary. So they may be working in Kansas City, Missouri, and Baltimore, Maryland, and Grand Rapids, Michigan, and San Francisco, California. So in our one-page synopsis summaries, we have more of that information.
All right. Well, I so appreciate you. And I think, further partnership, we definitely can figure out how we can post those awards from you and DOJ on the JCC website so people can have a one-stop shop. One of the biggest things we understand is how do we simplify information for individuals who may not know how to navigate, may be intimidated, but also we want to empower them with the information. So we definitely will be reaching back out to your team. Again, I want to thank you for joining us. Again, this is one of many to come. I actually want to thank everyone who tuned in for this session to learn more and actually visit the Just Us Coordinating Council to join the table to stay up to date on forthcoming opportunities. Again, thank you for being here with us and have a good day.